In 1446, when Scotland was a land of mist and legend, when kings ruled by sword and saints ruled by silence, a nobleman named William St. Clair stood at the edge of a forest and dreamed of heaven. The poet Robert Burns would later write, "The best laid schemes o' mice and men a gang after gly." But William's scheme, his grand design, it didn't go awry. It simply never finished. William St. Clair was born in 1410, into a family whose name carried weight across Scotland and beyond. The Sinclairs, or St. Clairs, as they were sometimes known, were descendants of Norse jarls and Norman knights. Their blood ran thick with stories of crusades and conquests, of oaths sworn in candlelit chambers and battles fought under foreign stars. But William's heritage held something else. Something whispered about in the margins of family histories. A connection to the Knights Templar, that legendary order of warrior monks who had guarded pilgrims in the Holy Land, who had grown wealthy and powerful, and who had been destroyed in a single brutal night in 1307. When the Templars fell in France, their treasure vanished. Their ships disappeared from the port of La Rochelle like ghosts into fog. And some say, that those ships sailed north, to Scotland, to the protection of King Robert the Bruce, who had been excommunicated by the Pope and therefore had nothing to lose by sheltering heretics. Did the treasure come to Scotland? Did the Sinclairs receive it, guard it, hide it? William never said. But he built like a man who had something to protect. He was 40 years old when the dream came. The Earl of Orkney, a title vast in land but sparse in gold. Old enough to know regret. Young enough to still believe in redemption. The dream arrived on the autumn equinox, September 21st, 1446. In his sleep, an angel, or perhaps the memory of one, or perhaps something his bloodline had been waiting generations to remember, unfolded a vision before his eyes. A building. Not a fortress. Not a palace. A chapel. But such a chapel as Scotland had never seen. Columns that would look like trees frozen mid-growth. Ceilings carved into geometric flowers that held the mathematics of the cosmos. Windows that would catch light and transform it into prayer. And symbols, oh, the symbols, layered so deep that men would study them for centuries and still not reach the bottom. William woke with tears on his cheeks and certainty in his bones. "This," he whispered to the darkness of his chamber, "this is what I must build." His wife thought him mad. His steward calculated the cost and went pale. But William was not a man to be dissuaded by practicality. He sold lands. He called in debts. He wrote letters across Europe in his own hand. "I seek craftsmen, stone carvers who can make rock breathe. Pay is uncertain. Glory is guaranteed." They came. From France, from Flanders, from Italy. Master masons with calloused hands and secrets learned in cathedral workshops. They brought techniques whispered from chartres and symbols studied in lodges where geometry was religion and compasses were sacred tools. The foundation stone was laid on September 21st, 1446. The same date as the dream. William insisted on it. He stood in the morning mist, surrounded by monks and masons, and placed his hand on cold Scottish sandstone. "Let this be a place where earth meets heaven," he said. "Where the visible and invisible touch. Where seekers find, even if they don't know what they're seeking." The original design was ambitious, a full cruciform church with transepts and a soaring nave. But as the years passed and William's fortune drained away like water through his fingers, the plan contracted. What was meant to be a cathedral became a chapel. What was meant to be a statement became a whisper. But oh, what a whisper! William spent 40 years of his life on Rosslyn Chapel. Not just his money, but his time, his attention, his obsessive, relentless focus. He walked the site every dawn, watching walls rise stone by stone, watching arches curve like hands folding in benediction. He commissioned carvings that made visiting clergy uncomfortable. Alongside the expected biblical scenes, the Stations of the Cross, the Apostles, the Virgin Mother, there appeared other figures. Older figures. Over 110 green men, faces emerged from the stone. Ancient pagan symbols of nature's cycle, of death and rebirth, of the wild divinity that Christianity had tried to bury but could never quite kill. These faces peered from capitals and corbels, leaves and vines spilling from their mouths as if they were speaking in the language of forests, of earth, of the old gods who remembered when Scotland belonged to oak and standing stone. The green men were not Christian. But William didn't care. Or perhaps, he understood something the church had forgotten. That the divine is too large for one story. That truth wears many faces. That a place of worship should worship all of creation, not just the parts that fit neatly into doctrine. As the chapel took shape, people whispered. About the symbols. About William's intentions. About what he might be hiding. The 7 deadly sins and their opposing virtues were carved into the western entrance: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, lust, each depicted in brutal, unflinching detail. And facing them, humility, kindness, patience, diligence, charity, temperance, chastity. A moral mirror for anyone entering. A reminder that every soul contains both darkness and light, and the choice between them is made new every day. But there were stranger things too. High on one wall, almost hidden in shadow, hung an angel carved upside down. Wings spread, face serene, falling. Lucifer, the light-bearer who chose pride over obedience, who fell from heaven and became the adversary. Why would William place such a figure in a Christian chapel? Was it a warning? A confession? Or something more complex? An acknowledgement that even the fallen are part of the divine architecture? That opposition creates the tension that holds the universe together? No one knows. William never explained. But he watched the angel being carved, and he smiled. A private, knowing smile. The ceiling became William's obsession in his final years. He commissioned hundreds of stone cubes and bosses to be carved with intricate patterns, roses, stars, geometric designs that seemed random but weren't. Each one different. Each one precise. 213 cubes in total, arranged across the vaulted ceiling in a pattern that would mystify scholars for centuries. Some said they were decorative. Some said they were symbolic. Some said they were a map. And they were right, all of them. Because the best secrets are the ones that reveal themselves slowly, that mean something different to everyone who looks, that refuse to be pinned down into a single truth. Among the carvings, botanists would later find something impossible. Plants that should not have been known in 15th century Scotland. Maize, Indian corn, carved with perfect accuracy down to the kernels on the cob. Aloe vera, a New World plant, rendered in stone decades before Columbus sailed. How did Williams Masons know these plants? Had Vikings brought back knowledge from earlier voyages? Had the Templars carried botanical secrets from the East? Or had someone, William, perhaps, or his grandfather Prince Henry Sinclair, who allegedly sailed to the Americas in 1398, seen these plants with their own eyes and remembered? The mystery remains, as William intended. But the greatest mystery of Rosslyn Chapel was not carved by William's commission. It was carved by a boy, an apprentice, a young soul with a gift that would outlive them all. And that is where our story truly begins. Chapter 2: The Apprentice's Secret. Every stone holds a story, but some stones hold souls. Among the dozens of craftsmen working on William St. Clair's dream, there was a boy whose name history has lost. We know him only as the Apprentice. Some later stories called him Ian, a good Scottish name, meaning God is gracious. Whether that was truly his name or simply what legend gave him, we cannot say. What we do know is this: he was young, perhaps 16, orphaned by plague, raised by monks at a monastery whose name has been forgotten. The monks taught him letters and prayers, geometry and music. They taught him to see God in pattern, divinity in proportion, the holy in the mathematical perfection of a circle, a spiral, a branching tree. And somewhere in that education, he learned to carve. Not just to chip away stone, but to release what was already inside it. To see the finished sculpture sleeping in the raw block and simply wake it up. The apprentice came to Rosslyn in 1484, the year William would die. He was assigned to study under the master mason, a man of great skill but greater pride. A man whose hands could create beauty but whose heart harbored a poison that skill could never cure: envy. The master was tasked with creating a pillar for the south side of the chapel. Not just any pillar. The pillar. A column that would anchor the entire eastern end of the building, that would represent the axis mundi, the world tree, the cosmic pillar that in Norse mythology held up the 9 realms. William wanted this pillar to echo Yggdrasil, the great ash tree from the old stories his Viking ancestors had carried south. A tree whose roots reached into the underworld, whose trunk supported the world of humans, whose branches stretched into the realm of gods. A tree around which dragons coiled, drinking from the wells of wisdom. The master knew the legends. He sketched designs, studied proportions. But something eluded him. The vision wouldn't crystallize. So he made a decision. He would travel to Rome, to study the ancient pillars there, to find inspiration in the classical world. He left. And he made a fatal error. He left the apprentice behind. The first night after the master's departure, the apprentice dreamed. In the dream, he stood in a forest of impossible trees. Their trunks spiraled like DNA before DNA had been discovered. Their branches interlaced into a canopy of living geometry. And at the center of the forest stood a figure. Some would call it an angel. Some would call it a vision. The apprentice simply called it truth. The figure did not speak in words. It spoke in knowing. It placed a hand on the boy's forehead, and suddenly he could see, truly see, the pillar. Not as a plan or a sketch, but as a complete, perfect, inevitable form. 8 dragons spiraling up the shaft, their serpentine bodies intertwined but never touching. Leaves so delicate they seemed ready to rustle in a breeze that would never come. Vines cascading downward like water frozen mid-pour. And at the base, 3 crowns representing the Trinity, or the 3 roots of Yggdrasil, or the 3 stages of spiritual ascent, depending on who you asked. The apprentice woke with his heart pounding and his hands shaking. He knew, with the kind of certainty that bypasses thought entirely, that he had to carve this pillar. Immediately. Before the master returned. Before the vision faded. He worked for 3 days and 3 nights. He ate only when other apprentices forced bread into his hands. He drank from a water bucket without looking away from the stone. He carved in a trance state, his chisel singing against the sandstone, sparks of stone dust hanging in the air like constellations. The other workers gathered to watch. At first with curiosity, then with awe, then with something approaching reverence. They had never seen anyone work like this. It was as if the boy's hands belonged to someone, something else. As if he were not creating the pillar but simply uncovering it from the stone where it had always been waiting. On the morning of the 4th day, he stepped back. Covered in dust, exhausted to the point of collapse, eyes red from sleeplessness and stone grit. The pillar was complete. It was perfect. 8 dragons coiled upward in a helical dance, their scales so precisely rendered you could almost count them. Leaves burst from the top like a canopy, each vein visible, each edge delicate as paper. The proportions were mathematically flawless, every measurement in perfect ratio, every curve a lesson in sacred geometry. William St. Clair, now an old man, hobbled to the chapel that morning to check on progress. When he saw the pillar, he wept. "This," he whispered, touching the stone with trembling fingers, "this is what I saw in my dream. Exactly this." The apprentice smiled. A tired, peaceful smile. The smile of someone who had fulfilled their purpose and knew it. "Then my work is done," he said. But his work was not done, because 3 days later, the master returned from Rome. The master entered the chapel in the early morning, alone, eager to share the sketches and ideas he'd gathered from the eternal city. He walked toward the eastern end, mentally preparing to begin work on the great pillar that would secure his legacy. And he saw it. Already carved. Already complete. Already perfect. Something broke in him. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Like ice cracking on a frozen lake, silent, invisible, catastrophic. He walked closer. Studied the dragons, the leaves, the proportions. His professional eye confirmed what his ego refused to accept. This was better than anything he could have made. Better than anything he would have made. Who did this? The other masons, feeling the air pressure change like animals before a storm, pointed silently at the apprentice, who stood in the corner cleaning his tools, unaware of the darkness approaching. The master walked over. The apprentice looked up, smiled. An innocent, open smile. A smile that had no idea it was about to be the last expression his face would ever make. "Master," the boy said warmly, "you're back. Look, I finished the hammer fell." One blow? To the temple. The apprentice dropped without a sound. Blood pooled on the stone floor, the same stone he had lovingly carved, the same floor he had swept clean every evening. The master stood over the body, hammer in hand, breathing hard. The other workers froze. Time stopped. And then a woman's scream shattered the silence. The apprentice's mother. She had come that morning to bring her son bread, proud of the work he'd been describing in his letters. She stood in the doorway and saw her child, her only child, her reason for surviving the plague that had taken everyone else, lying still on the cold stone. They say her scream echoed in the chapel for hours after she stopped making sound. They say it soaked into the stone like water into sand, becoming part of the building's memory. The master was seized, tried, condemned. In medieval Scotland, the punishment for murder was swift and brutal. But before they took him away, William St. Clair made a decision that would last longer than any gallows. He commissioned 2 more sculptures. The first, the apprentice's mother, her face frozen in grief, carved into the wall opposite the pillar her son had made. Forever watching over his masterpiece. Forever weeping for the talent that died too young. Her stone eyes would gaze at the apprentice pillar for centuries, a monument to a mother's love and loss. The second, the master's face, carved on a different pillar. Not in pride or triumph, but in shame. His expression captured at the moment of realization, when the hammer fell, when the boy dropped, when he understood what he'd done and knew he could never undo it. His stone face would stare at the apprentice's mother across the chapel forever, a reminder that genius destroyed by envy destroys the destroyer too. These carvings remain today. You can visit Rosslyn Chapel and see them. The mother's grief. The master's shame. The apprentice's glory, spiraling upward in stone dragons that will outlive us all. But there is one more detail, one last piece of the legend that refuses to die. They say that every year, on the anniversary of the murder, the Apprentice Pillar weeps. Not metaphorically, literally. Stone tears, or something that looks like them, appear on the carved surface. Perhaps condensation. Perhaps a trick of light and shadow. Perhaps the building's way of remembering. The official explanation involves humidity and mineral deposits. The scientific explanation is perfectly rational, perfectly reasonable, perfectly insufficient. Because some truths are too large for facts alone. The Apprentice Pillar stands today as perhaps the most beautiful column in all of Scotland. Tourists photograph it. Scholars study it. Artists try to sketch its impossible delicacy. But if you go very early in the morning, before the crowds arrive, before the tour guides begin their practice speeches, if you stand very still and place your hand on the stone, some people say you can feel it. A pulse, a warmth, a presence. The apprentice, still working, still perfecting, still doing what he was born to do. Creating beauty from stone, and silence, and time. Chapter 3, Nights in the Shadows. Beneath every chapel, there are crypts. Beneath every crypt, there are secrets. To understand what lies beneath Rosslyn Chapel, we must travel backward in time, to 1307, to a Friday that changed history, Friday the 13th of October, a date that would become synonymous with bad luck, though few remember why. On that morning, across France, soldiers of King Philip IV moved simultaneously in a coordinated strike that had taken months to plan. At dawn, they broke down doors and seized members of the Knights Templar, the warrior monks who had become the most powerful military and financial organization in Christendom. The charges were heresy, idol worship, obscene rituals. Most of these charges were fabricated. Philip owed the Templars an enormous debt and had decided that elimination was cheaper than repayment. Hundreds of knights were arrested, tortured, burned at the stake. The order was officially dissolved by papal decree in 1312. Their vast wealth, castles, farms, gold, sacred relics, was seized by the crown. Or was it? Because something disappeared that night. Something that has never been found. The Templar fleet. 18 ships were docked at the port of La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast. Ships that had carried knights and supplies between Europe and the Holy Land for decades. Ships that, by some accounts, now carried the Templars' most valuable possessions, not just gold, but documents, relics, knowledge accumulated over 2 centuries of existence. On the night before the arrests, those ships vanished. Simply sailed away into darkness. No record of their destination. No trace of their cargo. No graves for their passengers. For 700 years, historians have speculated. Where did they go? Some said Portugal. Some said Cyprus. Some said they sank in storms and took their secrets to the ocean floor. But others looked north, to Scotland. In 1307, Scotland was an unusual place. It was at war with England, and its king, Robert the Bruce, had been excommunicated by the Pope for killing a rival in a church. In the eyes of Rome, Scotland was already damned, which made it the perfect sanctuary for the Church's newly declared heretics. And the Sinclairs, William St. Clair's ancestors, had deep connections to the Templar order. They had fought alongside the knights in the Crusades. They had witnessed Templar rituals, learned Templar secrets, sworn Templar oaths. So when the ships needed a harbor beyond the reach of Philip's soldiers and the Pope's authority, where else would they sail? The legend says 12 ships made it to Scotland. That they landed quietly under cover of night, their passengers exhausted, their cargo precious beyond measure. And that William Sinclair's grandfather received them, sheltered them, and made a promise. We will guard what you brought. Until the world is ready. Until the time comes. What did they bring? Gold, certainly. Enough to fund the construction of Rosslyn Chapel a century later without bankrupting the Sinclair family immediately. But also relics. The fragment of the true cross, perhaps, the wood upon which Christ was crucified, which the Templars had guarded in Jerusalem. Ancient texts. Gnostic Gospels, Jewish mystical writings, Islamic mathematical treatises, knowledge that the medieval church would have burned, maps of lands not yet discovered, of coastlines drawn by ancient navigators, of trade routes that predated Columbus by centuries. And something else. Something that would sound absurd if it weren't carved so deliberately into Rosslyn stones. The body of Mary Magdalene. Not the prostitute of popular imagination. The Templars believed, some say knew, that Mary Magdalene had been Jesus's closest disciple, perhaps his wife, perhaps the true heir to his spiritual teaching, perhaps the Holy Grail itself, not a cup, but a person, a bloodline, a sacred feminine principle that patriarchal Christianity had spent centuries erasing. The legend says her remains were brought from France, where she allegedly lived out her days after Christ's death, to the Holy Land during the Crusades, then carried back to Europe by the Templars as their most precious treasure. And when the order fell, they brought her to Scotland, to Rosslyn. Is it true? No one knows. The crypt beneath Rosslyn Chapel has never been fully excavated. William St. Clair and his descendants built the chapel directly over the family burial vault, sealing it with stone and silence. Ground-penetrating radar conducted in the 1990s detected large voids beneath the chapel floor. Spaces that could be chambers, rooms, passages. The images showed what might be columns, what might be stairs, what might be anything. The Sinclair family, still custodians of the chapel, has refused permission for excavation. When asked why, they say simply, "Some mysteries should remain mysteries." But the clues are there, carved in stone, visible to anyone who knows how to read. Throughout Rosslyn Chapel, alongside Christian imagery, appear symbols that speak of older traditions. The triple goddess represented in oak, rose, and lily, three plants sacred to three aspects of the divine feminine. The oak for strength and endurance, the rose for love and sacrifice, the lily for purity and resurrection. These are carved repeatedly, a botanical trinity that predates and transcends Christian theology. Bees and honeycomb appear in unexpected places, ancient symbols of wisdom, community, and the sweetness that comes from collective labor. In Egyptian tradition, bees were tears of the sun god Ra. In Greek mystery schools, honey represented divine knowledge. The Templars used the bee as a secret symbol of their inner teachings, separate from the more public image of warrior monks. 56 bees appear in Rosslyn's carvings. 56, a number sacred in Druidic tradition, a number that appears again and again in ancient British monuments. Coincidence? Or a message left by masons who still remembered older ways? Grapevines coil around pillars and doorways, their clusters of fruit carved with careful detail. Officially, these represent the blood of Christ, the wine of communion. But they also represent Dionysus, the Greek god of ecstasy and transformation. They represent the sacred intoxication that brings mortals into contact with the divine. Pomegranates, the fruit Persephone ate in the underworld, binding her to the realm of death and guaranteeing her return each spring, are carved alongside Christian symbols. The pomegranate means resurrection, but not just Christ's resurrection. All resurrection. The eternal cycle of death and rebirth that predates Christianity by millennia and will outlast it by, who knows how long. These symbols tell a story that the official church history does not. They speak of a belief system that saw the sacred everywhere, in plants and planets, in geometry and growth, in the spiral of a shell and the branching of a tree. And beneath the chapel floor, beneath the Sinclair family graves, beneath the sealed crypts that have not been opened in centuries, what else is there? Some say nothing. Stone and bones and the disappointment of those who expected treasure. Some say everything. The accumulated wisdom of warrior monks who preserved what the church tried to destroy. Sacred texts. Relics. The true history of Jesus and his disciples. Maps that rewrite everything we think we know about the age of exploration. Some say Mary Magdalene herself lies there, in a stone sarcophagus, waiting for the day when the world is ready to acknowledge her as the apostle to the apostles, the beloved disciple, the woman who understood what the men could not. The truth remains buried. By choice. By design. By the will of a family that has kept faith with a promise made in 1307 to desperate men fleeing with desperate cargo. The Sinclairs became guardians that night. Not just of a building, but of a secret. Generation after generation, father to son, mother to daughter, they have passed down the responsibility. guard the chapel, maintain the walls, tell the tourists about the architecture and the legends, but never, ever open the crypts. Even today, members of the Sinclair family are involved in the management of Rosslyn Chapel. They sit on boards, make decisions about restoration and access, ensure that some doors remain locked. When journalists ask what's down there, they smile politely. When archaeologists apply for excavation permits, they are gently declined. When conspiracy theorists demand answers, they offer nothing but silence. Because perhaps the greatest treasure is not gold or relics or even forbidden knowledge. Perhaps the greatest treasure is the possibility, the mystery, the chance that somewhere, beneath your feet, truth sleeps like sleeping beauty, waiting not for a prince, but for a world that has grown wise enough to receive it without destroying it. And above that sealed darkness, the chapel stands, filled with light, filled with carvings that tell 1,000 stories to anyone patient enough to listen. One pillar in particular continues to draw eyes. The Master's Pillar, they call it, though the Apprentice Pillar gets more attention. This column features different symbology. Carved into its surface are symbols that scholars recognize from Templar grave markers, the double-edged sword, pointing both to earth and heaven, representing the warrior's dual nature, violence and protection, destruction and preservation. Beneath Rosslyn, according to some legends, lies not just one treasure but a map to many. Solomon's treasure, the wealth of the first temple of Jerusalem, lost when Babylon sacked the city in 586 BCE. The Templars allegedly found documents in the Temple Mount during the Crusades, documents that revealed where the temple treasure had been hidden before the invasion. Did they find it? Did they bring it north? Or is the map itself the treasure, the knowledge of where to look, encrypted in stone, waiting for someone with the key to decode it? The answer is under your feet if you stand in Rosslyn Chapel. Under the stones. Under the silence. Under 6 centuries of locked doors and kept promises. Waiting. Chapter 4: Royal Shadows. Kings and queens walked these stones, and each left something behind. Rosslyn Chapel was not built in isolation. It was built in a Scotland torn by war, shaped by alliances, haunted by betrayals. And the powerful of the land, those who wore crowns and commanded armies, they understood that William St. Clair was building more than a chapel. He was building a statement. King James II of Scotland visited Rosslyn in the 1450s, early in the chapel's construction. He was a young king, barely 20, but already shrewd enough to recognize the value of loyalty. The Sinclairs had fought for his family. They had bled for Scotland. And so, standing in the half-finished chapel, surrounded by scaffolding and stone dust, James made a gift. He granted William St. Clair additional lands around Rosslyn, not just as payment, but as protection. Royal patronage meant that the chapel would be seen as a holy work, blessed by the crown, above suspicion. It was a gift, but it was also insurance. Because even then, there were whispers about what William was building, about what he might be hiding, about symbols that didn't quite fit the approved Catholic narrative. James's gift said, "This man is under my protection. Whatever he builds here is Scotland's business, not Rome's." But the most mysterious royal visit came a century later, in 1563, by a queen who would become one of history's most tragic figures, Mary, Queen of Scots. She arrived at Rosslyn in early summer, when the forest around the chapel was thick with green and the North Esk River ran high with snowmelt. She was 20 years old, recently returned from France, trying to navigate the impossible politics of ruling Scotland as a Catholic monarch in an increasingly Protestant land. She was also pregnant, though history debates whether she knew it yet. Mary came to Rosslyn seeking something. Not treasure, not relics. Sanctuary, perhaps, or answers, or simply a few hours away from Edinburgh's suffocating court intrigue. The Sinclair guardian at that time was a man named Oliver, a descendant of William, who had inherited not just the chapel but the family's tradition of secrecy and service. Oliver received the Queen with the respect her station demanded and the care her state required. Mary looked exhausted. Beneath the royal composure, beneath the carefully styled hair and expensive fabrics, she looked like what she was, a young woman trying to survive forces larger than herself. She asked to be left alone in the chapel. For 3 hours, she knelt in prayer. Or perhaps not prayer. Perhaps she simply sat in the silence, surrounded by symbols of mysteries older than her kingdom, feeling the cool stone beneath her hands, breathing air thick with the scent of centuries. What did she pray for? History doesn't record it. But we know what happened next. When she emerged, Oliver was waiting in the courtyard. Without explanation, he pressed something into her hand. A letter, sealed with wax, small enough to hide in a sleeve. "If you are ever in danger," he said quietly, "open this." Not before. Mary looked at him. Her eyes, those famous eyes that had charmed the French court and would later watch her own execution, held questions she didn't ask aloud. She took the letter, nodded, and rode back to Edinburgh. She never opened it. Oh, there were plenty of times she was in danger. Danger became her constant companion. Her husband was murdered. Her throne was threatened. She was imprisoned by her own nobles, forced to abdicate, chased into England where her cousin Elizabeth would eventually have her beheaded. Through all of it, she kept the letter. It was found among her possessions after her death. Still sealed. Still unread. What did it say? No one knows. Oliver never told anyone he'd written it. The Sinclair family records, usually meticulous, contain no mention of it. The letter itself disappeared into the Vatican archives. Mary was Catholic, and the Pope claimed her belongings as holy relics. But some believe it contained instructions. Coordinates, perhaps. A place to run if Scotland became too dangerous. Or a secret, something Oliver knew about Mary's lineage, her pregnancy, her son James, who would unite the crowns of Scotland and England. Some believe the letter said, "You carry the bloodline. Protect it. We will protect you." Oliver St. Clair never saw Mary again after that day. His life took a different turn. A tragic turn. In 1513, Scotland went to war with England. Again. It was an old pattern, as reliable as seasons. English armies would invade, Scottish armies would resist, blood would soak into border soil that could grow nothing but grief. The Battle of Flodden Field was Scotland's greatest military disaster. On September 9, 1513, King James IV led his army south to support France in their war against Henry VIII. It was supposed to be a quick campaign, a show of force, a way to honor old alliances. Instead, it became a slaughter. 10,000 Scots died that day, including the king, including most of Scotland's nobility, including Oliver Sinclair, guardian of Rosslyn Chapel, who fought in the front lines because that's what Sinclairs did. Oliver took a sword through the chest in the afternoon, as the Scottish lines began to collapse. He was 43 years old. A good man. A careful guardian. A father of 3. As he lay dying in the mud, because battles always end in mud, no matter how noble the cause, his squire knelt beside him. "My lord," the boy said, voice shaking, "your sons, what should I tell them?" Oliver's breathing was labored. Blood frothed at his lips. But he managed words. "Tell them, guard the chapel. No matter what. Guard the stones. Guard the silence. Guard the promise." He died there. In England. Far from Rosslyn. Far from the chapel he had loved more than his own life. His body was brought home, buried in the crypt beneath the chapel, alongside his ancestors. Another Sinclair added to the layers of bone beneath the floor. And his eldest son, barely 20, became the next guardian. The weight settling on his shoulders like armor, cold, heavy, permanent. The Sinclairs have a saying, passed down through generations, never written in any official record but whispered from father to child in the quiet moments before sleep. We are the guardians. We do not choose when we serve. We do not ask what we guard. We simply stand. Until it is time for another to stand. Until the stones crumble or the world ends or someone finally understands what William built here. Some call it a blessing. Some call it a curse. Perhaps it's both. Perhaps all sacred responsibilities are. Because here is the truth the Sinclairs learned, generation after generation. To guard something precious means losing things precious. Oliver lost his life. Others lost their fortunes, their reputations, their peace. Every guardian has sacrificed something. And still they serve. Because some things are worth more than one life, one family, one generation. Some things, truth, beauty, mystery, they are worth 600 years of sacrifice. And counting. In 1842, another royal visited Rosslyn. Queen Victoria, accompanied by Prince Albert and an entourage of court officials and artists. She was 23, newly passionate about Scotland after reading Walter Scott's romantic novels, eager to see the mysterious chapel she'd heard so much about. The chapel was in poor condition by then. 300 years of weather, war, and neglect had taken their toll. The roof leaked. Carvings were eroded. The grandeur William had built was fading like an old photograph. Victoria walked through slowly. She touched the pillars. She studied the green men. She stood beneath the carved ceiling for a long time, reading the patterns as if they were words in a language she'd forgotten. When she left, she wrote in her diary, "This place feels alive, as if the stones remember everything they have seen." She was right, more right than she knew, because stones don't just remember. They hold, they preserve, they wait. Victoria approved funding for major restoration work. Not just repairs, but careful, loving conservation. She understood that Rosslyn wasn't just a building. It was a library written in stone. A message to the future. A treasure that belonged to humanity, not just to Scotland. The restoration took years. Craftsmen worked with the same care the original builders had used, replacing only what was beyond saving, documenting every detail, trying to honor William St. Clair's vision across 4 centuries. And the Sinclairs, always the Sinclairs, they supervised. They watched. They made sure that certain areas remained untouched, that certain stones were not removed, that certain doors stayed locked. Even royal patronage had limits. Even Victoria's enthusiasm could only go so far. The crypts remained sealed. The secrets remained buried. Today, Rosslyn Chapel stands restored. Beautiful. Open to visitors from around the world. But the Sinclair family still serves. Still guards. Still keeps the promise made in 1307 to desperate knights carrying desperate cargo. They are not all named Sinclair anymore. The family name has branched, married into other clans, spread across Scotland and beyond. But the bloodline remains. The responsibility remains. And on certain nights, equinoxes, solstices, dates whose significance is known only to the guardians, someone still walks through the chapel alone. Checking. Listening. Making sure the stones are still holding their secrets tight. Chapter 5. The Reformation's Rage. Change comes like a storm, and storms destroy beautiful things. In 1560, Scotland burned with fever, not disease, religion. The Protestant Reformation had been building across Europe for decades. Martin Luther's 95 Theses nailed to a church door in Germany, Henry VIII break with Rome in England, Jean Calvin's austere theology taking root in Switzerland and France. Now it reached Scotland. And it came with fire. John Knox led the movement. A preacher with a voice like thunder and a certainty that terrified even his allies. He believed, knew, with the absolute conviction of the righteous, that the Catholic Church was corrupt, that its wealth was stolen, that its rituals were blasphemy disguised as worship. And he was not gentle in his reforms. Knox's sermons inspired mobs. Across Scotland, groups of Protestant reformers stormed Catholic churches and monasteries. They smashed statues of saints, calling them idols. They burned paintings of the Virgin Mary, declaring them graven images forbidden by Scripture. They melted down golden chalices and sold the metal, claiming it was God's wealth being returned to God's people. It was righteous fury. It was also vandalism on a breathtaking scale. Centuries of art, craftsmanship, devotion, reduced to rubble and ash in the name of purity. In August of 1560, a mob formed in Edinburgh. About 50 men, fired up by one of Knox's sermons about cleansing the land of Catholic corruption. They had already destroyed 2 churches that week. Now they were coming for Rosslyn. Because Rosslyn, everyone knew, was different. Not purely Catholic. Maybe not Catholic at all. Filled with strange symbols. Built by a family with Templar connections. Possibly hiding heretical treasures. If any place needed purifying by fire, it was Rosslyn. The guardian at that time was Robert Sinclair, Oliver's grandson. A man of 60, whose hands shook with palsy but whose spine remained straight. He had been expecting this. He'd heard about the mobs in Edinburgh and Perth, heard about churches burning, heard about priests beaten in the streets. He'd known his turn would come. The night before the mob arrived, Robert gathered his family, sons, daughters, grandchildren, in the chapel. They stood in a circle near the Apprentice Pillar, holding hands in the flickering candlelight. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "they will come. They will demand entry. They will want to destroy everything." His youngest grandson, barely 10, started to cry. "Can't we fight them, grandfather? Can't we?" "No." Robert's voice was firm but gentle. "We cannot protect stones with swords. Violence breeds violence. We've seen enough blood on Scottish soil." "Then what do we do?" his eldest son asked. Robert looked around the chapel. At the pillars William had commissioned. At the carvings the apprentice had died creating. At the green men and angels and symbols that had survived 500 years. "We let them in," he said. "We give them what they want. But we negotiate. We save what we can." The mob arrived at noon. 50 men carrying torches and hammers, fired with the certainty that they were doing God's work. Their leader was a merchant named Douglas, a man who'd grown rich selling cloth and resented the church for taxing his success. He pounded on the chapel door. "Sinclair, open. In the name of the Reformed Church of Scotland, we claim this building for purification." Robert opened the door. Not a crack. Fully. Standing in the doorway, unarmed, hands visible. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he said calmly. "You wish to enter? Then enter. I will not stop you." The mob, expecting resistance, found themselves momentarily confused. Douglas recovered first. "You admit this place is corrupted? That it holds Catholic blasphemy?" "I admit," Robert said carefully, "that it holds many things, and that you have the power to do as you will. So I ask only this: take what offends you, but spare the stones themselves. They are Scotland's heritage, not Rome's property." Douglas considered this. He was not a stupid man, and Robert's calm dignity threw him off balance. This was supposed to be a cleansing, not a negotiation. "We take the golden crosses," Douglas said. "The paintings, the altar furnishings. All Catholic wealth returns to the people." "Take them," Robert agreed. "They are yours. And we destroy the graven images, the statues, the false idols." Robert's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "If you must." The mob entered. For 2 hours, they worked methodically. They stripped the altar of its gold crosses and candlesticks. They took the chalices and the censer. They smashed several small statues of saints that stood in alcoves, stone figures that had been carved with the same care as everything else in Rosslyn, but which represented, to Protestant eyes, the sin of idolatry. They painted over some of the more overtly Catholic frescoes. They removed the confessional booth and threw it into the courtyard to be burned later. Robert watched. His sons watched. They said nothing, did nothing. Let the rage burn itself out like a fever. And then Douglas walked to the Apprentice Pillar. He raised his hammer. "No." The word came from behind him. Not Robert. One of the mob, a young man, barely 20, who'd been quiet throughout the destruction. Douglas turned. "What?" The young man pointed to the wall, to the carving of the apprentice's mother, her stone face frozen in grief. "Look at her," he said. "Just look." Everyone stopped, turned, looked. The afternoon light was coming through the western window at just the right angle. It illuminated the mother's face, and in that light, in that particular slant of sun, her carved tears looked wet, as if she were crying real tears, as if the stone itself was weeping. It was a trick of light, shadow and shine, the natural play of sun on textured stone, but it stopped 50 angry men in their tracks. The young man's voice shook. "She's already suffered. Her son died here, murdered by envy, and we're going to destroy his only memorial? What are we?" Douglas lowered his hammer slowly. He looked at the Apprentice Pillar, at the dragon spiraling upward, at the leaves so delicate they seemed ready to flutter in a breeze that didn't exist, at the craftsmanship that transcended religion or politics or theology. "This isn't Catholic," he said finally. "This is something else." He turned to Robert. "We've done enough. We take the gold. We take the altar. But the carvings?" He gestured around the chapel, at the green men and angels, at the symbols that predated Christianity and would outlast it. "The carvings stay." Robert didn't show relief. Didn't show anything. Just nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. The mob left. They took cartloads of church furnishings. They burned some items in the courtyard, the confessional, some wooden statues, several paintings that were more Catholic propaganda than art. But they left the stones untouched. That night, after the mob had dispersed and the courtyard smoke had cleared, Robert walked through the chapel alone. It looked different. Stripped, wounded, but whole. The pillars stood. The ceiling remained. The apprentice's mother still gazed at her son's masterwork. The green men still peered from their capitals. The symbols, all those layered, mysterious, pre-Christian, post-Christian, beyond Christian symbols, they survived. Robert placed his hand on the Apprentice Pillar. It was cool to the touch. Solid. Eternal. "Thank you," he whispered. To the stone. To the boy who had carved it. To whatever divine or human force had made that young mobster look up at the right moment and see a mother's grief instead of a target. "Thank you." But the chapel's trials were not over. Not by centuries. In the decades that followed, Rosslyn fell into disuse. Scotland's official church became Presbyterian, austere, sermon-focused, suspicious of elaborate buildings and ritual. Grand chapels like Rosslyn were seen as embarrassing remnants of superstitious times. Rosslyn was abandoned. Not demolished, but ignored. Which is sometimes worse. The roof began to leak. Rain dripped through holes, pooling on stone floors, feeding moss and lichen. The carvings, exposed to weather, began to erode. Details that had taken weeks to carve wore away in seasons. In the 17th century, Cromwell's army used the chapel as a stable. Horses stood where monks had prayed. Soldiers carved their initials into windowsills. The building, already wounded, was further degraded by the casual disrespect of men who saw it as just another building. Then it became a blacksmith's shop. For nearly 50 years, a local smith set up his forge in the chapel. The heat and smoke further damaged the carvings. Soot blackened the ceiling. The constant clanging of hammer on anvil seemed a bitter echo of the apprentice's murder, creative work corrupted into mere commerce. But through it all, through neglect, through misuse, through the slow erosion of time, the Sinclairs maintained their watch. They couldn't afford major repairs. The family's wealth had declined with Scotland's fortunes. But they paid for the minimum, patching the worst holes in the roof, clearing debris, ensuring the structure didn't collapse entirely. And they waited. For 300 years, they waited. Because the guardians understood something that the destroyers and the neglectors didn't. Time is patient. Fashion changes. What one generation scorns, the next may treasure. All they had to do was keep the chapel standing until the world remembered how to see it properly. In the 19th century, the world finally remembered. The Romantic movement swept across Europe, bringing with it a new appreciation for medieval architecture, for mystery, for the Gothic sublime. Walter Scott's novels made Scotland fashionable. Victoria and Albert's love affair with the Highlands made Scottish heritage desirable. And Rosslyn, strange, mysterious, beautiful, damaged Rosslyn, became interesting again. The restoration work Victoria funded in the 1860s saved the chapel from collapse. But more than that, it marked a shift. From survival to revival. From endurance to appreciation. People began to visit. To study. To wonder. The chapel had survived the Reformation's rage, the neglect of centuries, the casual destruction of armies. And now, finally, it could begin to tell its stories again. Not through sermons. Not through priests. Through the stones themselves. Which had been patient. Which had been waiting. Which had always known that truth survives longer than fury. Chapter 6: The Modern Guardian. Every ending is a new beginning. His name is Malcolm Sinclair. He is 72 years old. And every morning at dawn, he unlocks the door to Rosslyn Chapel. This is not a metaphor. This is literal. Malcolm is one of the current guardians, a direct descendant of William St. Clair, though the family name has branched and the bloodline has spread across Scotland and beyond. He lives in a small cottage at the edge of the Rosslyn estate. His wife passed 5 years ago. His children are grown and scattered, one in Edinburgh, one in London, one in Canada. They visit when they can. They worry about him living alone. But Malcolm is not alone. He has the chapel. Every morning, he walks the quarter-mile from his cottage to the chapel. Rain or shine, snow or summer. His knees ache. His back complains. But he walks. He unlocks the door, a large iron key, heavy, cold in winter, worn smooth by centuries of hands turning it in the same lock. He steps inside. And every morning, without fail, he says the same thing. Good morning. I'm still here. And so are you. He's talking to the chapel. To the stones. To the presence that anyone who spends enough time in Rosslyn eventually feels, a sense of being watched, being known. Being welcomed by something that doesn't have a body but definitely has awareness. Malcolm walks through slowly. He checks each section, looking for new cracks, signs of moisture, evidence of small damages that need addressing before they become large problems. But he's also listening. People think I'm mad, he said once to a journalist who asked about his routine. They think I'm a superstitious old man talking to stones. Maybe I am. But these stones have stood for almost 600 years. They've survived more than I ever will. So yes, I talk to them. And sometimes, I swear they talk back. The journalist asked what the stones say. Malcolm smiled. They say, keep going. One more day. One more dawn. The story isn't finished yet. Malcolm's routine hasn't changed in 40 years. He became the primary guardian in 1984, when his father died. It wasn't a job he applied for. It was a responsibility he inherited, like eye color or a tendency toward stubbornness. At first, he resented it. He had a career, an architect, ironically, with a firm in Edinburgh. He had plans. He had a life that didn't involve waking at 5 a.m. to unlock a medieval chapel for tourists. But then something happened. Something he still doesn't entirely understand. It was his 3rd month as guardian. A cold November morning. He'd walked to the chapel in darkness, tired, irritated, questioning why he was sacrificing his life to maintain a building that most people had never heard of. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and he felt it. The shift, the presence, the sense that he was not alone, that he had never been alone, that the chapel was full of invisible witnesses who had been waiting for him to finally pay attention. He stood in the center of the nave, surrounded by darkness except for the first pale light coming through the eastern window. And he heard, not with his ears, but with something deeper, a voice. Not words. More like a knowing. You are the latest, not the last. One of many. And you are needed. Malcolm never told anyone about that morning. Not his wife, not his children, not the other trustees of the chapel. It sounded too strange, too mystical, too much like the kind of story that gets you quietly removed from positions of responsibility. But it changed him. He stopped resenting the responsibility. He started seeing it as a privilege. He began to understand what his father and grandfather and all the Sinclairs before them had known. The chapel chooses its guardians as much as they choose it. Over the decades, Malcolm has seen Rosslyn transform. When he first became guardian, it was a quiet place. A few hundred visitors per year, mostly academics and architecture students. The chapel was respected but not famous. Then came 2003. Then came Dan Brown. Then came the Da Vinci Code. Suddenly, Rosslyn was in a best-selling novel. The climax of a global mystery. The alleged hiding place of the Holy Grail, Mary Magdalene's bones, secrets that could shake Christianity to its foundations. Malcolm read the book with mixed feelings. It was fiction, obviously. Brown had taken real legends and woven them into a thriller that was more entertainment than history. But it wasn't entirely wrong. The Templar connections were real. The symbolism was real. The sense that something profound was hidden in Rosslyn's stones, that was real too. In 2006, the movie came out. Tom Hanks and Audrey Tautou stood in the chapel, cameras rolling, turning Rosslyn into a global icon. The scenes were beautiful. The cinematographer understood how to capture the light, the mystery, the sense of a place existing outside normal time. And then the visitors came. Thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Malcolm watched the tourism numbers explode. The chapel, which had struggled for funding for decades, was suddenly self-sustaining. They could afford proper conservation, professional staff, educational programs. But something was lost too. Before the book, Malcolm said once, people came here looking for beauty. After the book, they came looking for secrets. They'd walk past the Apprentice Pillar without really seeing it, too busy searching for symbols that would prove the conspiracy theories. They'd take photos but not really look. Consume but not receive. He doesn't blame them. Not really. Curiosity is valid. Seeking is sacred. And if Dan Brown's fiction brought people to a truth-filled place, maybe that's not such a bad thing. But he wishes, sometimes he wishes, that more people would slow down. Would sit in silence for 10 minutes. Would let the chapel speak to them instead of lecturing it with their expectations. Every evening, Malcolm is the last person to leave. He walks through slowly, saying goodbye to each section. The Apprentice Pillar. The mother's carved face. The green men. The angels. He locks the door behind him. Tests it twice to make sure it's secure. And then he stands in the courtyard for a moment, looking up at the building in the fading light. "See you tomorrow," he always says. And he means it. Because despite his age, despite his aching joints, despite the reasonable arguments his children make about retirement and rest, Malcolm has no intention of stopping. "I'll guard this place until I can't walk anymore," he said once. "And when that day comes, my son or my nephew or someone will take over. Because that's what we do. That's what we've always done." People ask me what I'm guarding. They expect me to say treasures or relics or secret documents. But the truth is simpler. I'm guarding memory. I'm guarding the possibility that a place can hold meaning across centuries. That beauty matters. That mystery matters. That some things are worth more than money or fame or even understanding. I'm guarding the chance that someone will walk into this chapel feeling lost, broken, uncertain, and will walk out feeling like the world is larger and stranger and more full of wonder than they'd remembered. That's the treasure. That's what I guard. Malcolm sits by his fire at night. His cottage is small, comfortable, filled with books and photos. On the mantel is a picture of his wife, smiling, holding a grandchild. He misses her every day. But here's something he's never told anyone. Sometimes, when he's in the chapel alone, early morning before the tourists arrive, or late evening after everyone's gone, he sees her. Not a ghost. Not exactly. More like a persistence of presence. She stands near the Apprentice Pillar, her favorite spot, looking up at the carvings she loved so much. She turns, smiles at him, and then fades. The first time it happened, Malcolm thought he was losing his mind. But it kept happening. Once a month, maybe. Always brief. Always gentle. And he realized his wife loved this place as much as he did. She'd spent countless hours here, volunteering, giving tours, talking to visitors about the history and mystery. Of course she'd return. Of course her love for Rosslyn would leave an imprint. Love always leaves an imprint. On people, on places, on stones that are patient enough to hold it. I don't guard stones, Malcolm said once, late at night, talking to a researcher who'd asked him what it means to be a Sinclair. I guard memories. I guard love. I guard every person who ever stood here and felt something true. Every mason who carved with devotion. Every visitor who wept without knowing why. Every seeker who found what they weren't looking for but needed anyway. That's what 600 years of guardianship means. We don't own this place. We serve it. And through serving it, we serve everyone who ever needs to know that mystery still exists in a world that tries so hard to explain everything away. Malcolm is old now. He knows his time as guardian is finite. But he also knows the chapel will continue. The Sinclair line will continue. The responsibility will pass to new hands, younger hands, hands that will unlock that heavy iron door at dawn and say, "Good morning. I'm still here. And so are you." The stones will answer, as they always have, "Good morning, Guardian. Thank you for another day." The story continues. The mystery deepens. Welcome home. And somewhere beneath the floor, in sealed crypts that have not been opened in centuries, treasures sleep. Or secrets sleep. Or nothing sleeps but stone and bones and the dreams of those who built this place. It doesn't matter which. Because the real treasure is right here. Above ground. Visible to anyone who takes the time to look properly. Beauty that survives. Memory that persists. Love carved into stone. That's the treasure. And Malcolm Sinclair, 72 years old, aching joints, missing his wife, faithful to his ancestors. He guards it. Every single day. And so we come to the end of this night's journey. But Rosslyn's story doesn't end. It continues. Every day. Every visitor. Every sunrise that touches those stones. Tomorrow night, we'll return. Not to the daytime chapel, not to the historical guardians. Tomorrow night, we'll step through a different door. We'll meet someone else. Someone modern. Someone who came to Rosslyn searching for answers to a pain that history couldn't heal. Her name is Alessandra. And on one autumn night, when the moon was full and the world was quiet, she climbed over a wall and entered the chapel after dark. What she found there, what found her, changed everything. But that story is for tomorrow. Tonight, we rest. Tonight, we let these memories settle into your bones like warmth, like safety, like the knowledge that some places in this world still hold magic. Let your breath slow now. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. Feel the pillow beneath your head. Feel the softness surrounding you. Feel the weight of the day lifting, dissolving, leaving you light. As you drift toward sleep, imagine you're standing in Rosslyn Chapel at dawn. The light is golden, the stones are warm, and you are safe. Protected, held by 600 years of devotion, by guardians who have watched over this place since before your grandparents' grandparents were born. You are part of the story now. By listening, you've become one of the seekers, one of the witnesses, one of the people who know that mystery still exists, that beauty still matters, that some secrets are worth keeping. Sleep well, traveler. The stones are watching over you. And tomorrow night, we'll discover what happens when the stones start speaking back. Good night.